Hello, I'm Barry Daniel, and this is the podcast of the Middle Way Society. Our aim is to encourage a universal approach to living a more integrated, ethical life, avoiding dogma or any appeal to authority. We are joined today by Nigel Ohlson, a counsellor, psychotherapist and professional youth worker practising in South Devon in the UK. He's also experienced in delivering adventure therapy-based programmes, and this will be the topic of our discussion today. Hello Nigel, welcome to the Middle Way Society podcast.
Hi Barry, thank you for having me here.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, can you tell us a bit about your background to start with, Nigel, and how you decided to become involved with this field of work?
Yeah. I'll probably go quite a way back.
Okay.
Just because it's relevant. So I left school at, I was age 15 when I left school, and I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. I had a lack of purpose. And looking back now, I had very low self-esteem, and I can probably lay that at the school I went to.
Yeah.
I wasn't particularly academic, and I left with a whole host of the classic core beliefs that are similar to the young people I work with today. So a sense of just not being good enough and not fitting in, really knowing what my purpose was. So I left school with a small handful of O-levels they were at the time, and CSEs, nothing special.
Yeah.
And the only positive thing I had going for me was I was a very keen judo player.
Okay.
And up to that point, really all the successes I'd had, I had no academic success. All the successes I'd had was in my sport. I put a lot of energy into that. But I was also into surfing because I lived on the coast down in North Devon, so I was a very, very keen surfer.
Yeah.
And that filled a lot of my life. So I left school with a lot of negativity about school and about education.
What do you think it was about the school that didn't address those? What was it lacking?
For me, and it wasn't lacking it for everybody, because some people were very successful at school. I just wasn't interested. The curriculum didn't interest me. I couldn't relate what I was learning to the real world and the world I wanted to live in.
Yeah, okay.
I also found that the whole education system was driven on deficits. It was always about what I wasn't good at, what I wasn't capable of doing. I just felt really put down by it, I suppose, yeah. Barry, if I was honest.
Yeah, okay.
So I do carry a lot of negativity around with me about my own school career, but I try and put that to one side.
Yeah.
So I left school. My first job was as a bingo caller, and then I had a spell as a police cadet at Hendon, which ended quite spectacularly unsuccessful at that. And I was still floating through life, not really knowing what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then I was offered a job as a judo coach in a school for it was a specialist boarding school for young people. Well, it was boys. It was a boys' school for people with the behavioural and learning difficulties.
Yeah.
Mostly behavioural difficulties. And I kind of found my niche in life. I really, really got on with these lads. As I was saying, I was only going a few evenings a week to start with as a judo coach. But gradually I got more and more involved in the school, and I would take the lads out surfing and doing a whole range of different activities. And I started to build a relationship with them through activity that I could see wasn't necessarily about my personality, but it was a very different relationship that I was developing with them than the other staff in the school. So the teaching staff and the staff who were there to look after them. And it was a massive eye-opener for me, really. So it kind of set me on a direction that I was to work in right up today. So working with young people with a whole range of different problems, whether it's behavioural problems, learning difficulties, or today, mental health problems. After a few years of working for social services, I decided to get back into education. So I applied to do a postgraduate course at university. I didn't have a degree. But I had done some social work training over the years, and that was enough to get me into a postgraduate diploma in youth work. And once again, just finding myself at university, although I found it difficult as an adult, I was treated differently and I seemed to respond differently. And so once again, I found my place at my time.
Interesting.
So I was a youth worker. I became a professionally qualified youth worker in 1991. And my first job was as a senior area youth worker for Brixham, which is a small fishing village where I live at the moment.
Yeah.
And the whole youth work philosophy, I know it's probably an overused word, but I'm really passionate about the fact that working with young people on a voluntary basis. So youth work is an offer. So I would work with groups, or I'd put on programs and young people would be invited to participate. They'd be invited to come to the youth club.
Yeah.
Or to take part in some of the outdoor activities. And it was down to me to sell the benefits. They didn't have to be there.
Yeah.
It was voluntary participation. So I was a senior area youth worker for a number of years, and gradually kind of my interest was always working with young people in the outdoors. And in order to do that in a local authority setting, I had to get some qualifications.
Sure.
So over the years, I started to get qualifications in some of the things I was interested in. So I became a canoeing coach and a kayaking coach, and I was a very keen caver.
Yeah.
So I got some qualifications that enabled me to take groups caving and rock climbing and mountaineering and using the moors. So I had sort of a healthy little batch of tickets, which meant I didn't have to spend so much time in the office. And that was good for me, and that was good for the young people I worked with, because they didn't really want to spend that much time in school.
Yeah.
So I got involved in alternative curriculum work for the students that weren't really achieving anything during the school day. And that kind of led me to ask some questions about what it was about the work I was doing that seemed to be getting really, really good results. And that led the way, I suppose, coming to the present day, that led the way to running some programs for young people who are at risk of going into care, based around an adventure therapy model. And that proved to be quite successful. I used the research I did on that program as the basis for my master's degree, which was based around adventure therapy and youth work. Shortly after that, I got a job. I worked in Australia for a while, and adventure therapy is a lot more developed in both the States and Australia.
Right.
So I did part of my research in Australia.
Yeah.
On extended journeys. So I worked for an organisation within risk management within this organisation, and they would do up to 1 month's wilderness journeys using a whole variety of methods. So it might be you could be climbing up Mount Kosciuszko and then travelling by raft, cycling, walking, a whole range of things for a month, carrying everything you need with you with just occasional food drops.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that brings me to now, really, Barry. This is the work I do now.
What a fascinating journey you've been on there, Nigel. Okay, well, shall we dive in then? What would you say are the origins of adventure therapy? How did it sort of evolve?
Well, I suppose the traditional origins was from experiential education.
Yeah.
Which is similar to the youth model in some ways. Young people were seen as young people or young cadets who were doing military service were seen as benefiting in terms of behaviour and their leadership model by taking part in challenging and physical activities. Some of the private schools and some private schools actually developed around experiential education. That was the core of the curriculum, and the academic work followed that. For me, that wasn't really my interest that got me into it. Adventure therapy for me is built around two theories, and one's the psychoevolutionary theory, and the other one is Edward O. Wilson's hypothesis, which he calls biophilia. So they go hand in hand, and the psychoevolutionary theory is fundamental to the work I do, because what that says is that actually within the society that you and I live in, Barry, within the UK, we live in kind of a constructed society evolution takes a long time to happen. So since the Industrial Revolution, we've kind of locked ourselves up in these urban cages,
Yeah.
away from the natural world. And our psyche, as Jung would call it, is still that of an organism, of an animal that would be much more closely related to nature. The Americans actually call that phenomenon sort of a nature deficit disorder. They have a range of conditions they would put down to nature deficit. And I think this is what I was seeing with the young people I was working with. So I was taking them out of their school buildings, out of their towns and out of their cities, and bringing them into nature. And they were finding something which was far more natural and far more easy for them to understand.
And how did that manifest? How did that come across from them?
Well, initially, it came across, in measurable ways within the youth service. It came across through participation.
Yeah.
Because a lot more people were wanting to engage in outdoor education programs than wanted to engage in other activities that were on offer. So there was a range of sporting activities and social activities. The outdoor education program was always oversubscribed.
Okay.
We never used to put out there what we would be doing at any particular time. People just wanted to get out in the minibuses. They were keen to do that during the school day, but also when we'd run holiday programs. So for several years, I had a whole load of teepees. So I used to take over this field on the side of the River Dart and build what I called a Native American camp. So we had this First Nation camp, and we would just have group after group coming, spending a week there, and we would run that right the way through the summer holidays. Quite often it wasn't about the activity, it was just about the experience of being next to water, being under canvas, cooking around an open fire, not cooking on a stove. It captured people's imagination, I think.
Sure, yeah. You mentioned the second model. I forget what that was called.
Oh, so biophilia.
Yeah.
So Edward O. Wilson's theory is that as human beings we have an innate connection with nature and the natural world. So he would refer to what we have in our houses. Generally speaking, if you look at the pictures on people's walls, they're of natural scenes.
Mm.
We like to wear natural fibres as clothing. We like to go out and look at pictures of sunsets.
Yeah. We bring plants in as well, and we have pets as well. I suppose that relates to that model too, presumably.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Even people who say they don't like going outdoors, I know people who've said that. I've actually been in their homes, and they would prefer to have wooden furniture than plastic furniture. They would prefer to wear leather shoes and plastic shoes. There could be other things going on here as well, but he noticed a whole range of effects.
I'm just thinking of an example there where, you might go into a restaurant and you see a beautiful bunch of flowers on the table, and you think, how lovely. And as you get closer, you notice that they're plastic, and it doesn't quite feel the same, does it, as that initial feeling?
No, there's a sense of disappointment, isn't there?
Yeah.
And a sense of, I suppose in some ways that's society, isn't it? Because we are living, the psychoevolutionary theory model is saying we are living in an artificial, constructed society, that we're psychologically not evolved enough to be able to manage in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And by taking ourselves away from nature, we're actually causing ourselves psychological problems.
But I'm thinking also with adventure therapy, am I right in saying, well, obviously this engagement with wildness and nature is really important, but you're also really trying to encourage the people involved to take on roles of responsibility. Is that right? Empowerment's a big thing.
Yeah, empowerment is a really, really big thing. And I think linked to empowerment is the understanding that within our society we no longer have, I suppose you could call it a rite of passage, but we no longer have a marker where young people get from being a child to being an adult.
Yeah.
We kind of drift into adulthood at some point, and it's a different time for different people, and we don't really mark its where that point is. Um,
And why is that important?
well, it's important for some ways because it comes back to your question about responsibility.
Okay.
In order to have responsibility, we need to, that sense of empowerment is, for me, sounds like you're actually given something. At a certain stage, you're given the space and the freedom to act in such a way to make decisions for yourself and other people. And that is the basis of responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm working with a group of young people at the moment, a group of young men, and as part of the work, they all suffer from issues around anger and self-control. And this is causing them problems both in the criminal justice system and at school. And as part of the work, they came up with role models who they could see had overcome this within their own lives. And quite often that was a close family member. So in a couple of cases, it's their fathers who had been excluded from school, gone to prison, been in fights. And the task was to actually go and spend time with these people and talk to these people about what changed in their life for them to start to get more control over their life and be able to settle down more. And the thing that came out was this idea. One lad actually said, my dad said to me, he didn't even have to think about it. He said, it's when I started to take responsibility for my own actions.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about what responsibilities they have. And really, they don't have any responsibilities. And these are 15s and 16-year-olds.
Yeah.
They have things that they're supposed to do, that they rebel against, but they don't really have any responsibility. Childhood, I suppose, is a social construct as well. And so different societies, childhood means different things. But in our society, childhood seems to be this thing that just goes on and on and on.
So how do you cultivate responsibility in the adventure therapy setting?
Well, in the adventure therapy setting, it's tied in with the youth work philosophy, which is around enabling and empowering. So little things happen. They sound like little things. They're quite big things for groups, really. But the first thing is to, as a group, for them to decide how the program is going to be made up. So if it's a journey, are we going to be walking? Are we going to be using canoes? Where are we going to go? What are we going to eat? Who's going to cook? How are we going to divide the labour between us? So the adventure therapist, within adventure therapy, quite often we have somebody who's in a therapy role as the therapist, and somebody who is in a guide role, who's taking on the responsibility for the risk management of the group and transferring the skills that they need to learn how to paddle and use equipment.
Okay.
But both the adults who are working with the group need to be on the same page. That is, that we're not actually doing things for the young people. They're doing it for themselves in a real life situation. So it's not an artificial situation. We're actually going on a real river and we're camping at night and we're cooking food and we're dealing with whatever the world throws up at us at any particular time.
Well, that brings up another question here. That you mentioned risk management, but also there must be presumably a degree of exposure to risk and challenge as part of that inevitable part of assuming responsibility.
Yeah. I think, when you ask me the question, Barry, what's interesting for me is how the issue of responsibility kind of filters through all aspects of the positive benefits of adventure therapy. Because we take responsibility away from young people and we never seem to really give it back in a positive way. On the programs we run, we do give the young people a knife because they need a knife as a tool in order to make some of the things they need to make, in order to prepare food. And they take responsibility for that knife and they're expected to use it in a responsible way. And certainly when I first started giving people a knife, there were lots and lots of people who were totally against it, who would say, it'd be misused, they'd be stabbing each other, they'd be losing them, all sorts of things. But it's incredible that actually I've never had any incidents of young people misusing a knife because they see it as a responsibility and they embrace that.
And also, presumably, it's a massive symbol of trust you actually giving them that knife. Is saying, you know, I have confidence in you.
Yes, yeah, it does. And then, you know, these young people, they don't just turn up. So there's a period of socializing them to the model of adventure therapy beforehand.
Okay.
And for them to make a conscious decision based upon what is going to be, that they take part or not. So we do talk about, you know, it's your responsibility to look after your equipment, to look after one another, to take responsibility to find out what the weather's doing, what the tides are doing. So that there is an argument, and I think it's a very sound argument, that, you know, there are some young people who are at such a stage in their life where it wouldn't be sensible just to give them a knife. But those people coming onto this program, it is symbolic and it is important, and it's something they haven't experienced before.
No, it sounds great. For me, it seems to sort of have a certain CBT feel to it, in the sense that change is enacted via direct experience through challenge. To what extent would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I do use a lot of CBT in my work, and sometimes I do use pure CBT. So it's very, very closely linked to CBT in several ways. So the first way is that it's collaborative. So CBT is a collaborative therapy where the counsellor and the participant make a decision to work together to achieve certain goals. Just like youth work, CBT and adventure therapy, it is based around trust. But before you can have trust, there has to be a sense of relationship. So within CBT, it's a therapeutic relationship, as it is in adventure therapy. But also in youth work, there has to be a relationship there, a strong relationship, because it's voluntary participation. So if the young people that I'm working with don't like me, or then they just won't turn up, and I don't have a program. So relationship is fundamental.
Sure. Yeah.
Within the model of CBT, though, one not so much a difference, but an interesting perspective is CBT. The typical CBT scenario is that the way we think about something, or what affects the way that we feel, and then those feelings affect the way that we behave. So the sort of the classic CBT story really is the woman on a bus who was going shopping. She was going into town. She was going to meet her friends, and she was quite excited. She was going to buy some new clothes, and then she was going to go and have dinner with her friends, and that night they were going to go out and have a good time. She was feeling really good. She got off the bus, she saw one of her friends, and she waved and said hi, and the friend ignored her. So her thoughts, her beliefs about herself kicked in. Oh, what is it? Why have I been ignored? What is it about me? Is it because I'm a bad person? Do they know something about me? Can they see through me? And then that brings in the feelings of the mood drops. So her mood drops. So she doesn't really feel like going for a coffee anymore. She doesn't really feel like socializing. And then her behavior changes. So she gets back on the bus, goes home, closes the curtains, and she sits and she worries and she thinks about what's just happened. Within adventure therapy, we start from the behavior end of that. So we activate people. So we get them to do things, challenging activities that really that challenge them physically, but also psychologically, where they have to overcome some fears. And that could be fears around working with other people, or it could be fears of falling, or tight spaces, or water. Once they overcome that, it's our job to ensure they succeed. So it has to be well facilitated. Then they start to feel different. And once they feel different, then they start to think in a different way.
And you mentioned earlier that adventure therapy has been influenced by Jung to an extent, especially in relation to wildness. Now, another apparent influence is John Dewey. What input does he have?
Well, I'm not hugely knowledgeable about Dewey, but he was certainly one of the early exponents who recognised that classroom teaching had a lot to be desired, and actually taking people out and giving them real life experiences in the real world was a richer, more valuable way to learn than based in the classroom. And it was that generation of educationalists, really, who set the scene for experiential learning, which, as I say, is a forerunner to outward bound. Certainly the work that I did, which is outdoor education. We're still within the adventures therapy. You know, we still see that challenging activity has an effect on people's self-esteem, their ability to work with other people. We still see that as a very, very strong component. But my work now focuses a lot more on helping people to see that by changing the way they think can help them to achieve more in their lives, and looking at those transferable skills. So succeeding in the outdoors, so by being able to go on a 10-day canoe journey with a group of people and to complete the journey, to be able to look after yourself, to be able to look after other people, to be able to prepare food, how they are transferable skills for life.
Sure. Okay. Well, in what context is adventure therapy normally carried out? I mean, is it generally in groups?
Well, adventure therapy, if we look on sort of a global scale, look at the States. So adventure therapy is carried out, generally speaking, in groups. There's a couple of reasons for that, and that is because, you know, in real life situations, it's important to start to learn to work with and relate to other people and empathise with other people. But there's also a financial implication. So I will work with groups or individuals, but generally speaking, it's really, really expensive for an individual to want to engage in a whole week's program of adventure therapy. Adventure therapy now, it doesn't always use the outdoors, and so adventure therapy can be carried out on high ropes courses. So adventure therapy can happen at centres without actually going into the outdoors at all. I'm not a big fan of that. I'm kind of noticing a phenomenon now when I'm running an activity. Archery, as an example, so I do a lot of archery, field archery. We've got these beautiful sites set in woodlands and rolling hills, and when I'm working with groups, I normally say to them, who's done archery before? And 2 or 3 little hands will go up. And now I have to say, not on the Wii, because the computer game, the Wii, has an archery game. And these young people, who can be 15, 16-year-olds, really feel that they've done that activity because they've sat in front of the screen and done it. And I think we're heading that way with the use of climbing walls and with the use of high ropes courses. Immersion into nature, I think, is a fundamental part of adventure therapy that we can't really miss out on.
Okay, well, we've talked about a couple of techniques you used, but could you maybe just expand on that a bit more? What other sort of techniques and strategies do you use in AT?
We do solo time, where the group might split up. They might build their own shelter. That could be a tent, or they could build their own shelter out of what's around, and actually spend time without. So they don't play with their phones, they don't have books, they don't have activity. They just sit. They just sit in nature, and they allow whatever happens for them to happen. So I don't kind of give too much information.
Yeah.
And with that sort of activity, because it can sound like it's quite a hard sell, I tend to start that by saying, you know, we're going to have an opportunity to do something that perhaps you've never done before. And during that time, incredible things can happen for you, but you need to give it a go. And during the course of the week, they're asking questions, and I need to big it up.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, once they've done it, if they've done a 40-minute solo or a 12-hour solo, there is so much to talk about afterwards. So much comes up. It's a really, really very powerful technique. We also use the outdoors as a metaphor. Within caving, you know, we look at doing a journey underground as a journey of self-discovery. And as you know from coming where you come from, if you look at a cave, it's very organic. It looks like you're inside a body.
Yeah.
And then you're emerging into the daylight. So we use a lot of metaphor in adventure therapy. We use writing and poetry.
Okay.
And there's a really, really good exercise, which is It Is I Am exercise, where participants might sit and look at something that captures our imagination, a natural object. It could be a rotten log. And they write a description, and it is a description, a very detailed description of what they see. And then they rewrite that, but instead of it is, they would write I am. And I'll talk about what that brings up for them when they start to use the I am rather than the it is. So there are 4 of the most important ones I use.
Okay, so it might be an opportunity now for you to just give us an example of a typical adventure therapy outing.
Okay, but well, if I can just give you a couple, Barry, if I can give you one that perhaps people who've done adventure therapy before or who know a little bit about adventure therapy might recognise.
Okay.
And then I could just give you a brief rundown of the sort of work that I might do with an individual, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So a typical adventure therapy program would involve a group of people engaging on an extended journey that was going to physically tax them, where they have to overcome real world challenges. So whether they're real world challenges around nature, or whether they're real world challenges about group dynamics and socialization. And the therapist who works with that group is intervening as things arise within the group. So issues are allowed to arise within the group and they're dealt with in that real world situation.
Yeah.
So that's probably a typical journey, and it could be the sort of the trail journeys in the States or the canoe journeys that I run with groups of people down here in Devon, and they're particularly aimed at young people who are troubled in some way, perhaps at risk of exclusion, or perhaps at risk of going into care or getting involved in the criminal justice system. The model of adventure therapy that has proved to be very, very successful with me. If I can give you a little anecdote, I was asked to work with a young woman who suffered from OCD, but along with her OCD, she developed depression, and she hadn't left home for several months. Her depression actually got so bad for a period that her mum was having to wash her in bed during the day, go to work, and she'd still be in bed when she came home. She kind of just existed. She was very, very low. I was asked to go and do some work with her. It was actually just to do some CBT initially. She wasn't able to engage with CAMS because she wouldn't leave the house. When a CAMS worker came, she soon she couldn't build a relationship with that work, and so that fell down. So I did a few sessions with her indoors, and we started to talk, and we started to get on. It's a very simple term, but just get on, be able to communicate, be able to laugh, have some fun. She'd show me some of the paintings that she drew. And then she talked about her aspirations, what it is she wanted to do. And she mentioned that she wanted to go into the army. I told her that one of the caves I used was used by the army quite a lot as a testing ground. And I told her why I loved caving and what you'd see underground and what it's like, the temperature. And she enjoyed the story. So we went from a story to a possibility.
Yeah. So
I said to her that would she be interested in going? We could go during the school day, so we'd be the only people in the cave. And eventually she said she would like to do that. So we went into the cave together, and bear in mind she hadn't left home up until this point for some time. So this is a very, very big step for her.
Sure. Yeah.
And we walked inside the cave, and she was totally freaked out by it. So rather than just leave, I encouraged her just to stay sitting in the cave for a little while, listening to the sounds. Because, as you'll know, Barry, the sound, just dripping water, in a cave can be very, very calming. It's a very peaceful place to be.
Yes, definitely.
And as we were sitting there, I was telling her about what we would see deeper in the cave. And so we talked about the lake that was at the bottom of the cave. And she actually said that she'd quite like to go a little bit further. So we did a full caving trip, which led to another caving trip.
Fantastic.
Which led to some more serious caving trips and then some climbing. And within a period of 4 or 5 months, she actually came with me as a helper to run some programs in Scotland with young people.
Wow.
Now, I found this quite fascinating as well. And within CBT, an important part of CBT is feedback. And so she gave me some really, really good feedback about how she couldn't quite explain it, but how spending time in the outdoors had captured her imagination and enabled her to challenge those fears that she had. Because she'd built up a lot of fears around people, around a whole variety of things that gradually got challenged the more she got out. So sort of what in CBT terms might be called in vivo work, actually going out with somebody in the real world and being with them as they challenge those fears. So that's a classic example of in vivo work within an adventure therapy context.
What an inspiring story. I'm thinking as well, I think that just happened naturally, but generally as a facilitator, how do you help participants internalise the experience they have, which can often be quite profound?
Yeah, well, CBT has a lot to offer there as well. So I've already mentioned the importance of feedback. So there's the importance of receiving feedback. There's also a therapeutic dimension to be able to give honest feedback. So working with groups and explaining how important it is to give feedback and to feel confident in giving feedback is part of that process. But CBT is also big on Socratic questioning and guided discovery. So just asking lots of questions to young people about what it was they experienced, and then going deeper with that. So when they've actually said something like, well, it was just amazing being out here, I just felt so free, to ask, well, what does it feel like to be free? So actually taking them deeper and deeper and deeper until perhaps they start to discover things themselves. Because you're right, Barry, the experience can be one where you go home and they think, that was great, that was a really good day and I enjoyed it. That doesn't really connect with the therapeutic process. Yeah. So we want people to go home and for them to start to see how things might be changing in the way that they think, they feel and they behave.
Is there empirical evidence supporting adventure therapy's efficacy?
Well, so there hasn't been a randomized controlled trial for adventure therapy. It's a very, very big movement. There is lots of evidence to support certain aspects of immersion into the outdoors. I mean, things like, I think it was the First, Second World War when the hospitals were full of their patients with TB. They started to put the overflow in the grounds of the hospital in tents with views of beautiful green spaces. And they noted that those patients recovered far more quickly than the ones who were trapped within brick walls in the hospital walls. There's lots of very, very strong evidence for the efficacy of cognitive behavioural therapy. So that's the therapeutic aspect of the work that I do is well evidenced. To say the jury is still out on the efficacy of challenging activity within nature and immersion into the natural world, I think most people would accept that that was beneficial. But I can't actually put my hand on any research that would prove that.
What drawbacks or limitations would you say it has?
Well, it can be expensive.
Yeah.
It's not a quick fix. You have to get people out in the countryside, out into wild places. A drawback with schools, local authorities, and the NHS is that they have certain therapies, CBT being one of them, that do have a strong evidence base that they would rely on. And so this time of austerity to actually pay for participants to be involved in something that wasn't proven can be difficult. Most of the organisations, most of the people I work with come from quite progressive voluntary organisations or are self-funded. I am in the process of trying to set up a community interest company so that we can apply for funding, so that we can offer the sort of courses that I run to disadvantaged groups.
Now, well, I wish you the best of luck with that, Nigel. And
Thank you.
what is your understanding of the middle way, Nigel? And if so, how might that relate to what we've been talking about today?
Well, it does relate. Certainly, the first thing that comes to my mind, which I think is very important in the work I do, is the Jungian idea that the psyche, just like the body, is constantly trying to repair and adapt itself to new situations, so whatever is happening at a particular time. And within the field of mental health, that has some significant repercussions, really, because I was talking with somebody the other day who's an art therapist, who was saying he worked with somebody for 10 years, and after 10 years, he spoke to his client and suggested that they wrote a paper about the work they'd been doing together. And she agreed. And so she put some notes down about her experience. And it turned out that she said, for the past 10 years, my therapist didn't know that I'd had an 8-inch carving knife with me when I came into therapy.
Wow.
And so when he told me this, I was kind of thinking, wow, that's incredible. But actually, his response was really quite interesting, because his response was that this woman had come from a violent, aggressive family and had been in violent, aggressive, abusive relationships. So actually, it made really perfect sense that she would readdress that balance when she was working with another man. The only way she could go into that relationship was if she felt safe.
Sure.
And so her behaviour actually, in that sense, makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps what you have said about the middle way and about that messy middle ground does fall into that area where sometimes we can look at people's behaviour as being confused and irrational. But actually, when you look at the context of their lives, it makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really interesting insight for me as well, Nigel. Thanks for that. Okay, well, my last question. If people wanted to find out more about your work, how would they go about it?
So I've got a website, which is www.southdevоncbt.co.uk. Or if anybody, I'd love to hear from people. I'd love to hear people's comments and feedback, because I'm big on feedback, as I've already said. And that's Nigel at southdevоncbt.co.uk.
Brilliant. Okay, well, it's been a great pleasure talking to you today, Nigel, and for giving us such a really comprehensive overview of adventure therapy. I'm certainly a lot better informed now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barry.
You can find out more about middle way philosophy at www.middlewaysociety.org.